to those of you tuning in already. Welcome to today's Accelerator session on advancing a just transition to a circular economy, hosted by PACE and ILO in the context of the WCEF 2021 in Canada. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. What a fantastic event the WCF has been so far, building on the WCF online last September, and also the WCEF+Climate that the Netherlands hosted in April this year. My name is Nila Malwani. I'm a policy officer at the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management in The Hague and working for the Dutch government, and I'll be moderating today's session. As I just mentioned, some brief housekeeping rules. Feel free to turn your cameras on during the session. We're really hoping to have an interactive conversation. So it would be great to see the people in the room. We would see each other regularly if this wasn't online, so it'd be great to see everyone. Nonetheless, I would ask that everyone mute their microphones and use the chat session, the chat function to ask any questions that you may have. The questions will be curated by us, and we'll pose those back to the moderator. So feel free to jump in with questions at any time during today's session. For those of you who are new to this, today's session will cover 3 waste streams: electronics, plastics, and textiles, and the intersection between 2 very important SDGs, namely 8, decent work and economic growth, and SDG 12 that focuses on sustainable consumption and production, while making a link also to the broader SDG agenda. It's so great to see some of the organizations here that were present at the WCEF+Climate, where we kicked off the conversations on these 2 crucial SDGs, and look forward to building the collaboration. We have an exciting but very packed agenda, so I suggest we go ahead and start. To start, I'll give the floor to one of our co-hosts for today's session, the Global Director of PACE, Mr. David McGinty, to also explain a bit more about today's session, the content, and also the project proposal that PACE is working on together with ILO. Over to you, David.
Sure, thanks. I won't take too long. So just to introduce PACE, PACE is a global coalition of leaders from the public and private sector working to advance circular economy. And so we do that with a lot of the partners who are here with us, the Dutch government, ILO, and several others. So thanks for those contributions and the time that your leaders spend with us to kind of really increase the levels of ambition and action. We started on this discussion last year in 2020. So through PACE, we started something called the Action Agenda process, which was getting together these front runners to bring the best evidence and knowledge that they have and really align and promote that an aligned agenda with key priorities that would overcome certain barriers to scale. So we brought that around different materials and industries, so plastics, electronics, textiles, food, and capital equipment. And one of the kind of innovative things that we did in that process was bringing the knowledge around impacts to be a first filter for what we should prioritize. So not looking at circularity for its own purpose, but what do we drive in the environment and for society that can be the most positive potential impacts. And of course, there are, this is not always clear when you go circular in certain materials or industry. So we wanted to really be intentional on the best available evidence to do this kind of impact assessment. And so that's what you would find when you look at the action agenda, really putting impact up front on what we anticipate to be positive benefits, what we anticipate to be trade-offs, and what we think are kind of largely unknowns on the impacts that need to be investigated before we really start promoting certain solutions. And that also started to address certain barriers. And decent work for us was not a surprising impact that we wanted to look at. It was a surprisingly consistent priority among our leaders. And I think that's for a few reasons. One is there's a moral imperative for decent work. It's embedded and embodied in the SDGs for a reason. The second is that it's a cross-cutting issue that whether you're driven to initially seek out decent work, right, that being the primary purpose of or objective that you're seeking, no matter what you implement, you want to ensure that you're providing decent work for people who have it, or if you're transitioning in a material or industry, you want to make sure that there's appropriate kind kind of reskilling or other initiatives in place. And then finally, I think decent work is a critical lens when we come to localizing CE. So looking at different economies and different countries and different industries and understanding the unique characteristics of the labor markets becomes really important for uptake of the solutions, both on a technical skills, like actually being able to implement, but also looking at where there might be resistance to adoption. And so because of that, we started one of the key actions, as Neelam alluded to, was at the WCEF+Climate earlier this year, getting a group together to talk about decent work in electronics and plastics in Latin America and Africa, and really trying to explore, as I was saying in the action agenda, that area where we don't really have clear evidence of what the positive or negative implications could be in decent work. So with ILO and with other partners, that's what we're really looking to explore through this project is, what are those knowledge gaps that we need to fill where we can help give the best advice and recommendations to practitioners and policymakers to make sure decent work is embedded in their circular economy strategies. So with that, thanks for joining us to talk about ideas, potential partnerships, kind of priorities in your country, in your supply chains or others. And I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David. And indeed, maybe take this opportunity quickly to congratulate PACE on the work that was done on the action agendas. For those of you who haven't read through them yet, I would strongly recommend it, because I think it really shows how we can come together to look at these different topics from the same lens and using the same language. And they're a very great basis for the discussion across sectors moving forward. With that, I'll quickly give the word to Ms. Alette van Leur, the Director of Sectoral Policies at ILO, another co-host of today's event, to further delve into the social aspect of the circular economy and also talk to us more about this project and the work of ILO more broadly. Over to you, Alette.
Thank you so much, Neelam. It's really my pleasure to speak at this year's World Circular Economy Forum's Accelerator session, that's quite a mouthful, on advancing a just transition to a circular economy. Let me first explain what the ILO is doing. For those of you that do not know the ILO, the International Labour Organization is responsible for the promotion and also the realizing of decent work and social justice. So the climate crisis is one of the biggest challenges we face today, and it is now seriously affecting our planet. And thus it affects us all. There's no doubt that a circular economy can help us reach our climate goals. But what is sometimes overlooked is the enormous contribution that circularity can make to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and notably its social and economic goals. If we were to redouble our efforts to make the circular economy inclusive, and by that we mean one that works for everyone, it has the potential to generate a new generation of sustainable enterprises and to create the decent and sustainable jobs we so urgently need. ILO research has indicated that the potential of a net gain of 7 million jobs worldwide by 2030. However, the situation today is unfortunately still quite different. The majority of e-waste collectors and shipbuilders, just to mention a few examples, work in the informal economy in unsafe and unhealthy conditions and with very limited opportunities to improve their livelihoods. The circular economy in its current form needs to be changed, and the transition needs to be managed properly. If not, we risk recycling the inequalities and decent work deficits that exist in the circular economy of today. So the way forward rests on a just transition, one that is based on social justice and decent work for all. The solution also rests on serious commitments and actions from ministries of labor, but also together with ministries of education, of industry, of trade and finance, to name a few, and of course on working together with employers and workers organizations across the globe. As the Director General of the ILO mentioned yesterday in his statement, we need global solidarity increased cooperation, and we need innovative partnerships. Joint efforts from all concerned will be needed to make real and systemic change happen. As David just indicated, we are working together with PACE to develop and implement a project to help bring about a just transition to circular textiles, electronics, and plastics. The aim of the project is to inform, mobilize, and enhance the capacity of governments, employers, and workers, but also other key stakeholders, so that they can take concerted action to accelerate a just transition to a circular economy. Many of you are already taking action, and this includes our panelists today. I look very much forward to hearing more about their work and to learn from their experiences. I'm keen to understand how our new ILO PACE project can help scale up the solutions that they are proposing to accelerate a just transition to the circular economy. I would like to thank you for your time, and I hope you find this session informative and inspiring. And with that, over to you, Neelam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alette. And I think you hit the nail right on the head with some key points: the need for urgent action now, and the need to scale up action, and also the fact that this is a very cross-sectoral transition. When we talk about the just transition to circular economy, we're talking about a collaboration across ministries and governments, but also with the private sector and also with informal workers. And that's, I think, a very good start for our panel discussion today. So today we'll be joined by three panelists: Andreas Manhart from the Eco Institute, Chevre Voltmer of Ocean Conservancy, and Nancy Ibarra Palacios of the Sustainable Production and Consumption National Business Association of Colombia. Welcome to all three of you, and thank you so much for being with us today. And I think our two introductory speakers set us up quite well for the discussion that we're going to have. Before we start, let me just remind all participants that the chat function is open, so feel free to please send us your questions so we can revert those to one or more of our panel members as the discussion continues. To start us off, Andreas, welcome. You have quite a significant amount of experience interacting with so many different stakeholders at different levels when it comes to waste management in the fields of electronics, textiles, and plastics, but also in others. Why do you think it's important that we address these issues on this project? What is the fundamental reason for this? Can you tell us more about the work of your institute and also why it's important that we address this?
Of course, thanks a lot. Why, of course, I think it was answered because it's not just the situation we live in at the moment. And I'll shortly speak about, as an introduction, about some of our experiences in 3 or 4 slides, right? And it's about turning around the economic framework conditions. And if you click next, I think our starting point is very much a finding over the years that pollution in waste management, in the circularity, occurs because it makes economic sense either to individuals or to organizations. And I would like to show an example here. This is a picture from open cable burning, which is one of the key pollution elements in waste management. And informal cable recycling does refer to this because it makes economic sense. Because the informal people, they want to sell the metal, but to do this, they must separate the metals from the plastics, from the insulation. And they could, of course, buy a machine, a shredder, a stripper, but it costs money, investment costs, operational costs, while a fire is free. They retrieve actually the same amount of metals without any investment costs, without any operational costs, basically without working time, but it causes extreme pollution. Click next, please. A second example, you can also draw the same example with single-use beverage bottles. There is a reason we see them all over the world. We have the alternative, we have reusable bottles tied to deposit refund systems, but they're more expensive for the companies. Setting up take-back systems, setting up the cleaning and the financial flows costs money. The cheapest way and the most profitable way is to fill the drinks in single-use plastic bottles, sell them, and the waste management is up to the society. This leads to pollution. And we all know the concept of extended producer responsibility, which is, I think, the key for turning around, but most initiatives get stuck halfway, mostly because this is lengthy, these are lengthy processes. And lobbyists, of course, come in, and many also the societies, the civil society, does not really trust in the process and doesn't really think it can lead to fundamental change. And this is the main reason why we think good pilots are needed. And now I present a pilot. Next slide, please. We have done together with a lot of partners in Ghana, and it's still ongoing. It's a very simple idea. Offer a better price to unburned cable. So basically, there is a place, at the moment one, but there will be more, where the informal players can hand in their cables unburned and get a payment for them. And the payment is better as what they would earn with burning. And this quickly changed the market. In the greater Accra region, cable burning is really on the retreat. Most cables are now collected and delivered, and they're given to sound recycling after collection. But of course, this costs additional money. In the first phase, GIZ from Germany did the financing. Now it's KfW, but also the government of Ghana now started to collect an e-waste levy from those who import equipment into the country for sale and fills it into a fund to be used for such initiatives. So I think this is a very interesting example of a large pilot that really changes the market in a fair and just manner. Next slide, please. So I think it's possible that you can turn around the economic framework conditions for a just transition to a circular economy. So the people who referred to burning until a few years ago are now suppliers. But of course, this costs money. So this does not really come for free. We have to think about who pays for it. But pilots really change the landscape and convince societies that EPR system, a just transition is possible. And it also wakes up the people and they get active politically in saying, this is something we really want to maintain. So this was not only done by us, there were a lot of partners indicated up right here. It's still ongoing and very promising. So this was my example as an input to this session. And I hope it's somehow also inspiring for other sectors, other fields and other countries. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andreas. And maybe just to follow up, I really enjoyed hearing about your pilot project and also how important pilot projects are. We're at the start of the decade of action for the SDGs. So I would be curious to see or to hear from you how you see the model to upscale some of these pilots and create economically viable projects that we can upscale. Where is the opportunity in that for you?
I think a pilot should be scaled to be a demonstration for long-term intervention. So I don't say we need a pilot and a second pilot. I think a pilot should aim to be the last phase before large-scale implementation on a regular basis. I think the pilot is basically third parties, in this case GIZ and KfW, took the money to make it happen. On the long run, those who earn money with cables, selling cables, should use their money to do it. So I think pilots are needed, large pilots. We should do them, but we should not think that pilots can save the world. They can be a stepping stone to better systems, and they should be. So I think pilots play a very important role, but we should also, as project managers, be not there to think lasting.
Thanks so much. And speaking of pilots and projects on the ground, I think that's a very great introduction for our next speaker. Over to you, Shever, and the work of Ocean Conservancy. You're running several projects on different waste streams, including electronics, plastics, and textiles. And when we spoke before the session, you explained to me how Ocean Conservancy's model is quite different and how you're a very unique stakeholder in the field also because of the way you work. Could you please tell us a bit more about the work of Ocean Conservancy and also the work you're doing in both Colombia and perhaps also in Vietnam, if time permits?
Thank you, Nilam. Some of you may be wondering what an ocean conservation NGO is doing on a panel about a just transition to a more inclusive circular economy. It's a fair question, and the answer really lies in our efforts to understand how trash ends up in the ocean and how we can prevent it. So we've really been on a journey for the past few years. And one of the things that we realized very early on in this journey is that in much of the world, waste collectors are a really critical part of the plastics value chain. And as Alette said, they frequently work in difficult and unhealthy, if not dangerous, conditions. They typically live on the margins of their own societies, and in many cases, they are viewed as an obstacle to progress. Some cases, they don't even officially exist. But from an ocean conservation perspective, they're frontline heroes in the battle to keep trash out of the ocean. So very much in line with David's opening comments, we at Ocean Conservancy started wondering, what if we viewed the 15 million informal sector waste workers around the world, not as part of the problem, but as part of the solution? Could we find a way to empower them? And in particular, could we find a way to increase the value or increase the collection of low value plastics that are at highest risk of ending up in the ocean? So, and then we asked ourselves, if we could increase the collection, could we find end markets for this plastic? And most importantly, could we do this in a way that delivers triple benefits? And in that, I mean social, economic, and environmental benefits. And so the idea of ASPIRE, which stands for Advancing Solutions to Plastic Pollution Through Inclusive Recycling, next slide, please, was born. So we're really grateful to members of our Trash Free Seas Alliance for stepping up to provide support and guidance for this project. So with that in hand, we then set out to build a best-in-class partnership to get the job done. So we teamed up with iWork, which is the Inclusive Waste Recycling Consortium, and their partner, Social Accountability International, to ensure that ASPIRE meets the highest internationally recognized standards, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, ILO conventions, and national laws. And in Vietnam, we're working with a group called the Center for Environmental and Community Research. And in Colombia, we're working with SEMPRE, which stands for Compromiso Empresarial para el Reciclaje. And I'll focus more on Colombia today because we are fortunate to have Nancy on the panel as well. So next slide. So in Colombia, we're working with 4 cooperatives in two cities, Cartagena and Buenaventura. And our partners in Colombia, SEMPRE, have been very busy designing and implementing a suite of activities to meet the goal of ASPIRE. So in Colombia, a lot of the work centers around helping the cooperatives achieve formalization. And this involves a number of elements, assisting them through the process of becoming recognized by the government as a public waste service provider. And this involves support for them to strengthen their businesses, access available government funding, and also assistance with logistics and identifying new markets for this low value plastic, including value chain mapping. And underpinning it all is training and capacity building to implement the social fingerprinting methodology of Social Accountability 8000. This is a standard to ensure that we are doing everything possible to the highest possible, everything possible to meet the highest standards. So beyond that, there are numerous outreach and education activities planned or underway for various stakeholders. These include efforts to educate local citizens on segregation at source, the importance of the informal sector, plastic and recycling. And there are also, to get it sort of what Andreas was saying, there are also conversations happening at both the local and national level. So with local governments, our partners at SEMPRE are exploring how best to collaborate to support informal sector integration, including access to critical services. And with national level decision makers, the focus is really around implementing regulations to transition cooperatives into waste service providers, as well as around extended producer responsibility, which gets at that question of how do you pay for this, right? Andreas pointed out it costs money. How do you set up a sustainable system to make sure that this works over time? And all of the conversations I've seen in the questions, in the chat, questions coming in, all of the conversations are being informed by the data, the robust data we're gathering and the lessons we're learning along the way. To close, I'd like to circle back to this concept of inclusiveness and dignity, because dignity is more than money. It's also acknowledgement. So at the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned that we at Ocean Conservancy came to understand the important connection in much of the world between the work of the informal sector and trash in the ocean. But our partners in Colombia grasped this connection immediately and its importance for driving the larger policy conversation around recycling, plastics, and circular economy. So what does this look like? Our partners at SEMPRE are conducting a survey of trash in the mangroves around where we're working. Mangroves are critical ocean nurseries, very sensitive ecological areas. And they have already conducted and organized a local cleanup to which they invited Colombian policymakers to partner with their cooperative members to clean up the local beach and to understand what they do. And for the first cleanup, all of the cooperative members wore badges that translated into "My job protects the ocean," which draws this direct line between their work for the environment and the importance of what they do and for policymakers. And I wanted to just end with that because I think it's really important that we not lose sight of the need for recognition and acknowledgement of this role that they play for the environment and for our societies at large. So I'll stop there. I know that I threw a lot of information at you in a very short time, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk about this project, which is near and dear to my heart. And I'd like to thank Neelam, as well as my fellow panelists, and of course, our partners at PACE. And I do hope that we can work together to find ways to build on this work for the benefit of both people and planet. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sever. And maybe just to follow up on some of the points you mentioned just now, I think it was very inspiring to hear about the beach cleanup idea as a way to connect people across sectors. And I think that's a very important part of the work that we're doing on the circular economy, and especially with these projects on the ground. It's really about making sure we're all aligning towards the same vision and goal. And that starts with the connection. Do you have maybe an example of how you built that connection, not just between policy officers on the informal sector, but maybe also in terms of how to get the private sector involved, or the more formal private sector actors involved?
Yes, so as I mentioned at the beginning, the Trash Free Seas Alliance is supporting this project financially. This is a group of mainly large companies. And we have been meeting with them one-on-one to look at the end market piece, right? And one of the things that has been quite inspiring for me as well is that one of our partners in this project came back to us and said, you know, this was a hard sell internally in our company, but now we've set up an internal working group to sort of understand who's at the other end of our supply chains and to try to make sure that, you know, it's not a 4-year-old girl, for example. So trying to make sure that people understand and that companies understand who is at the end of your supply chain? Who is that? And what kind of conditions do they work in? And are you comfortable with that? I think is an important element for sort of driving this work forward.
Yeah, thanks so much. And maybe, you know, just looking at the example of Colombia, we're very happy to have Nancy joining us today to talk to us a bit more about the private sector perspective. Nancy, working at the Business Association of Colombia, why do you think employer associations are important when we talk about the just transition to a circular economy, and how does that relate to your broader work? And can you give us some examples based on your experience?
No, it's great. Thank you very much for giving us this chance to share our experience as an employers organization. I think it's very interesting. I can introduce Andy in that way you can understand how we are working on collective action from the business sector on circular economy. So you will go to the next slide, please. So Andy is an employers organization working representing the business sector since 80 years ago. We have 1,400 enterprises in our network. We represent 50% of the national GDP. And something that is interesting is that we have 31 sectors, so 31 different value chains, as well as 12 regional branches. When we work on sustainability, on the circular economy, this regional area, matching with this sector vision is really important. Since 10 years ago, our Share Board decided to introduce sustainability at the heart of a strategy, and we have 5-year plans. Our 25 plan have an ambitious goal, and it's to help Colombia will become the leading country in circular economy in Latin America. And that it's a very important work for us, because we want to do that, implementing collective circular models, influencing sustainable lifestyles and everything through the business leadership. If you can go on to the next slide, please. So we have different initiatives on water and energy and different areas of circular economy, but I wanted to focus on EPR because we are working on that session about these areas. So we have two main areas. One of the hazardous waste and the special waste like tires, batteries, packaging, hazardous packaging, electronics equipment, and also the packaging EPR system. We created 10 EPR initiatives, the more important EPR initiatives. We have almost 800 companies involved with these EPR programs. And we collect during these 10 years almost 300 tons of different waste streams, and really collect and recycle and really close the loop with these waste flows. With packaging, it's a very interesting experience because it's the most recent EPR policy that is implemented in Colombia. And it takes into account other criteria on the EPR policies that are not implemented in other countries. So I believe it is an innovation on the policy that help an emerging economy like us to work on EPR on different kind of levels. With the just transition, we are making two big questions: how the green jobs could be created through these initiatives, and in what way the impacts of individual companies can help to create just decent jobs and sustainable jobs in the future. So we have a project in formulation with Pacific Alliance to understand the impact of circular business model, an EPR on green jobs creation. We're dealing with the tires, with the computers, EPR system, as well as our business model with some companies that are in the Dow Jones Sustainable Index. And we're working on the informal sector, which I don't like to call informal, because we are really working hard to make them formal, professional, and have a profession, and why not to become enterprise and be part of our network at Andy. So we have an alliance with SENA, which is the government entity, training on technical issues. And we work to make a big specialized training on how to deal with packaging waste, not with different kind of just packaging waste, in order to create a new job and help us to build better actions at the fieldwork. So what we learn on these areas is the just transition to circular economy is feasible, and we think that through the circular economy it's easy to create that kind of jobs. What is important is to understand that policy should be built according to local conditions and according to economic development. We cannot copy and paste. It's necessary to understand what happened at the local level. The second thing is we need dialogue between the value chains. We cannot talk about one enterprise. We have to talk with all the stakeholders in a value chain, especially we're working on circular economy, and try to promote this dialogue in a fair playground. We need to talk everyone. We need to build together. What is important is that the enterprises do not work alone. It's necessary collective action, especially we have supporting national goals. And that's what we will. That's why we have 800 companies into our EPR systems. The other thing is high standards. We need to understand how the science-based target could be built and could be compliant, and how we can really just report about these indicators with our different outcomes. Strategic alliance, just Ocean School Services, as well as different types of NGOs, international, multilateral organizations, such as ILO are working with us, the Inter-American Development Bank. Different organizations are helping us in these proposals and these goals. I agree with Andreas. Pilots are necessary. We as much as we can, we need to measure the impact and the best practices from pilot projects. And now with this green jobs agenda, I think it's important to understand the methodology to measure what is decent job, what is a green job, and how the circular economy really help us to create this kind of new and important standard in the jobs framework. So I hope that we have a lot of questions about it, and just give further details about our work.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nancy. And it was really interesting to also hear about the existing EPR policies in place in Colombia. You mentioned also the need to focus on the local conditions and economic developments when looking at policies more broadly. Yeah, could you maybe reflect a bit more on the EPR policies in Colombia and how those differ, for example, from the EPR policies in Europe based on
yes.
these conditions?
Yes, Nila. Normally, the EPR system asks for a quantitative target, just collection and recycling. In some cases, they ask for some recycling content on materials. In Colombia, we have three different new criteria. It's how much do you invest in innovation, how much do you invest on education, on sustainable behavior change, and third, how much do you work at all country level, just have regional targets. You have to go to places with low population density, and you get more points if you make this kind of action there. So we have to mix these 5 criteria in order to work on circular economy, and that accelerated our decisions on innovation, on regional scope, on the communication side of circular economy, because it's not just business, not just government, it's just us as citizens. So I believe that this EPR system really works to think at the simultaneously these 5 areas: quantitative targets, collection targets, education, innovation, and regional scope.
Great, thank you so much. So I see there's quite a bit of questions and comments in the chat also about pilot projects. So maybe just to revert back to Andreas, but I would be curious to hear all your opinions on this actually. If the pilot demonstrates what is possible, but the solution is still costly, how do we make them sustainable at a price that is affordable to all? Andreas, maybe first over to you based on your experience.
Yes, this was a good question. It's a provoking question to me because I would provoke back and say, waste is not a resource, it's a pain. It's a burden to society, and someone has to take the cost. Of course, we have to make it economic, but I think waste management problems at the moment are because we don't have the financing. It's not, sometimes the discussion reminds me to the Middle Ages where people tried to make, turn dirt into gold. It was not possible in the Middle Ages, and it's still not possible today. Dirt is still dirt and waste is still waste. Of course, we can do recycling of some part of it, but if you want to manage the rest and everything in an environmentally sound manner, really avoiding pollution in a fair way, someone has to pay more. And I think we all agree that those who earn money with the products are in the driver's seat or should be. So I think we should not look for the cheapest solution, but for the best solution. And if we exclude the financing question, I think we will not go anywhere. Good waste management costs money. In some segments, of course, you can earn a bit, but we also have to ask ourselves, why is there the informal sector active all over the world? They can make money with it, but actually not a lot. If they would do a lot of money, big companies would be in. Waste management is a problem and someone has to pay for it. So of course we have to find economic ways so that the prices do not go up too high, but at the moment it's underfinanced. I'm not sure if this answers the question, but it's part of a message as well, that very often it's the cheapest solution is not the best solution.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andreas. Shaver or Nancy, do you have any thoughts on this? Maybe Shaver first.
Yeah, when I was listening to the question, the immediate thought I had was that not managing waste also has a cost, right? A cost to the environment, a cost to human health, a cost to economic growth, to tourism, to greenhouse gas emissions. So I think one of the exciting things about a circular approach is that you try to sort of capture all of these things, right? Instead of looking at it as just a straight value chain, you're really looking at the whole picture. And so just to give you a brief example from outside of Colombia, we're doing some work in Panama. In fact, later today, I'll be on a stakeholder meeting with Panama City. And one of the things they found is that, mismanaged plastic waste blocks up drainage pipes, and that increases flooding, which is already getting worse because of climate change. So I think when you think about, yes, these things have a cost, proper waste management has a cost, but so does improper waste management. It's just a function of where is that cost and who pays it.
Yeah, thanks so much. And Nancy, your view on this topic?
Yes, Nila, I think there are two incredible factors if we want to go about efficiency and cost. And that's why collective initiatives are really important, because if you did that with one company, it would be very, very, very costly. But if you do that with 301 companies, so you make a scaling and you can share the cost. That's why first collective it's really important when we're talking on this area. The second thing I believe, I make that point on the presentation, we need to think about the local conditions. You cannot think about particular waste management solutions if you cannot have any plan on the country level. So it's necessary to build the entrepreneurship in investments on the facilities, understand how the market would work. And if you have solutions, you can just help to accelerate that with this kind of target. So I believe local and collective, it's the factor that will help to have a cost, a good efficiency and cost.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks so much. And I think you raised a very important point of, looking across the value chain, but also building a broader company base and not just looking at one actor when considering the price and the costs. And that's something that I think Trevor and Andreas both mentioned as well in their answers. Just to move on, Nancy, another question in your direction from Alice, I believe. Yeah, I was wondering whether any of the panelists have looked at paid skills training programs to create more decent circular jobs and also help the transition for those workers who may be displaced by a circular economy. Are there any paid skills training programs that you have experience working with or that you're doing or have seen in Colombia?
My experience is the circular economy creates jobs. I don't see that we are leaving people behind. I want to show you one big example. When we start to create the EPR computer system, we have only 2 plants in Colombia who can recycle and prepare this material to be recycled. Now we're having 65 plants in Colombia with the higher standards because they were audited from Europe. And here you have thousands of jobs that has been created. I believe it's an opportunity. That's why I say just transition is possible when you work in circular economy. You are really creating new jobs. You're really creating new opportunities to train people on technical areas. I believe that we need to measure that. That is the question right now, how we can understand the impact and look at the opportunities, because we are not facing that. It's on EPR and circular economy. We work on mining and other areas. I believe that there are examples there. But on EPR, I think it's a real opportunity.
Yeah, thanks so much. And we have a somewhat unrelated question from Chris White for Trevor. Does Ocean Conservancy have a back-end model to add value to the plastic waste, creating a viable and sustainable value chain?
We are working on that. That is part of what our partner iWork, the Inclusive Waste Recycling Consortium, is doing, is trying to find markets for these plastics. We're having some success. We're also leaning on our corporate partners to look at their global procurement chains to agree to acquire this plastic at a just price. So that is sort of our approach. It's different in different places. I wanted to just pull a little bit on that thread that Nancy has repeated a couple of times about local conditions, because in Colombia you have cooperatives, but in Vietnam, where we're also working, you do not. And so trying to understand how to build a value chain looks very different in those two places. And how we're going to approach that question looks different in both. But yes, we are working on that. We have, I won't say we've closed that loop yet, but we are optimistic that we will find some ways to do so.
Great. Thanks so much for those reflections. And just delving a bit further into the Vietnam project and what you just mentioned, I would be curious to hear also, Andreas, maybe based on your Ghana experiences, how these different structures affect projects on the ground. So, for example, in places where there are workers' associations where they weren't, what are your experiences with that, Andreas?
I mean, In Ghana, you don't really have an association which is well organized, but they are organized. So the people you can speak with, definitely. What we observed is that, you know, the policy sphere, they don't engage so much because initially they had little hope that this policy sphere does give them any change. But it seems to change now because they see there might be a benefit in it. So I think, at least in the settings I know, it depends very much. I mean, all organizations try to find out if it's worth engaging. And very often, if a dialogue is not designed well, if it's just a talk shop or players have the feeling it's a talk shop, they might not engage so well. But I think the situation really improved in Ghana, and you have people who really try to engage in policy development, at least from this perspective I have. I'm not based in Ghana, but I work with a lot of stakeholders there.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think it's just interesting to see that several of the same points keep coming up, right? Really adapting to a local context and really building on engagement across stakeholders by finding a way to have them relate to each other and ensure that they're able to have a conversation in the same way with the same goals. Perhaps another question from Alice in the chat. When the ILO estimates that jobs will be lost, how do you transition workers from losing their jobs into circular jobs? Shevr, maybe you have some reflections on that based on your work on the informal sector and drawing from some early experiences in Colombia and Vietnam.
Yeah, one thing I think is really important is that it's critical not to tell people in this sector who are already very vulnerable and have gotten the short end of the stick most of their existence what's going to happen to them or what they need to do. It's really important to mostly listen about what they want and what they need, and to make opportunities available to them, and then to see how they respond to that. And I say that because I feel like sometimes there's this idea that, okay, well, you know, you must be in a terrible place. You must be very unhappy. We're going to make your lives better in ways that they don't define themselves, and they generally do not tend to trust that. So that's kind of one point. And then one other point I would just add, based on this idea of how do you get the policy makers involved. And I think in general, people respond very well and engage around in a neutral way around objective data. So we are collecting data on the number of informal sector workers we're working with. We have a structured methodology to understand what point of the process they're in. We are working with them to understand how much, you know, and we're measuring, we can increase the collection of low value plastics. We are looking at, you know, what the price is now and what we can sell those for, how that affects the broader market. And then, you know, we will take those data points to policymakers to say, you know, the structure of the system to make it work is going to require X, Y, and Z based on the data that we're seeing. And we hope that over time this gets better. But I think you got to sort of start where you are and then sort of move forward from there. And you can tell maybe my first life, I was an economist, right? So that's where I started.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think that's a very valid point. Perhaps just a final general question that was posed in the group from Mamta, and maybe Andreas, looking your way on this. What tools and frameworks can be used for impact assessment?
I think very much emission monitoring, for example, for the cables. You can basically monitor emission reductions. And I think the most appropriate monitoring tool is, I think, speak with the people. So those affected in the system, did their lives and their situation improve? The waste workers, but also the ordinary people on the street who have to breathe the air or drink the water in a city system, for example. So I think interviews can do a lot. So I think monitoring is possible, and it's actually not so complex.
Great. And Nancy, you also mentioned a very strong need for data and metrics. I would be curious to see how do you look at impact assessment from your lens from the Business Association of Colombia?
We have different information systems. First, about what we put on the market. And this is something that has been recognized at regional level, because we really know how much materials in 50 flows are put on the market in Colombia. And this is very interesting because we really know how to make decisions on a real baseline. The second information system that we have, it's about our suppliers development, because we work on it with the informal sector as well as the private sector and B2B enterprises. We need to understand how they perform. Since the moment they use and they collect the waste, and then when they recycle that, because the EPR system policy has to make these details be reported in our evaluations from the minister and the different authorities. And the third point that we really measure is how, as Trevor told before, we can help to improve the conditions of the different suppliers and different providers in our network. So we really understand which are the needs, the competence that we need, the training that we need, investment that we need in order to help, especially on the informal sector side. And as I told before, we are in a formulation project with ILO, in fact, helping to understand how we can improve these job creation, these green jobs in Colombia on the tires, computers, and next on packaging, and then to understand sustainable value chains from some companies, and just give us some highlights of how we can improve these kind of actions through towards decent and sustainable jobs. So there are several other examples there, but I think that they're the most important ones.
Yeah, thanks so much. So we're approaching the end of the session, and I kind of want to give each of the panelists an opportunity to quickly conclude and share their key takeaways before we close off. So perhaps, Trevor, to start with you.
Sure. First, I'd like to say I agree with this idea that local conditions need to drive your interventions. I think robust measuring and monitoring is really important. But I also agree with what Andrea said about the qualitative piece. I was thinking when he was talking, how do I know that we're successful? We know that we're successful because lots of other cooperatives and cities are banging on our door to join the project, right? That's how you know that you've hit something that people need. So one of the things I guess I would end with is that we're really excited about the possibility of working with PACE and ILO to help take what we're learning and help scale that, because again, our goal really is to be a catalyst, and we hope that we can spur larger change through the work that we're doing.
Thanks so much. And Nancy, over to you.
Yes. I would say the same. It's important. I agree with Trevor. It's local. It's important. Qualitative data is important. Work with all the stakeholders and make a strong dialogue. It's important. And think about policies with the outcomes in the ground. It's just the key point. You cannot think about I'm the government and I would see things on, even in the business sector, we cannot see the things from the window. We need to go to the field, make pilot projects, understand what happened, and then just build the policies. That's, I believe, the best way to do things.
Yeah, thanks so much, and great building on the points that Trevor made. Just over to you, Andreas.
Thank you. First of all, I read the chat and I have to admit there are a lot of very good comments, and I would most of all agree to the comments saying circular economy is more than waste management and recycling. This is certainly true, but we only have 1 hour, so we can't cover everything. Circular economy is more. But I think the main finding, and I think this is why I like the session very much, it's about a just transition, because I think that the current situation is not just, it's actually highly unfair. Rich people will always find a clean beach where they can make holiday, and they will always find a clean air and clean water. The underprivileged will not. And the underprivileged are those who at the moment work with the waste of the world. So we need a fair and a just transition. There are various ways to do so. We need pilots, we need interventions, I think the economics play a major role. Those who create products that are difficult to be recycled, that end up in the rivers, in the oceans, must be held accountable in any way or the other of cleaning it up and preventing it. That's my main message, and I hope to see improvements with all of you soon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andreas. And maybe just a final word from Alette from the ILO. I would be curious to hear your key takeaways and perhaps also a focus, as the group mentioned, or as someone in the chat box asked, on the ILO guidelines on just transition, just briefly before we close.
Yeah, very briefly. Thank you so much, Nilam. Yes, excellent discussion, excellent examples. Indeed, jobs will be lost, but the net gain of a just transition to a circular economy is still over 7 to 8 million jobs by 2030 alone. The ILO has a rich body of international labor standards, as most of you probably know. Conventions, recommendations that also give guidance on how to transition from informality to formality. And just in this context, I would like to highlight very much and recommend to all of you the guidelines for a just transition towards environmentally sustainable economies and societies for all. Very long title, which is currently the only ILO guidelines particularly geared towards this just transition. It gives detailed information and advice and guidance on how to actually go about this. Just one last thing, just transition and transition to formality does not go automatically. It requires really concerted action. And as others have said already, there's always ways to escape from it. But if there's good governance systems and if there's goodwill, good political intentions, this is feasible. And with that, I thank you very much for your excellent webinar and very important webinar. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alette. And I think those are extremely important points you mentioned. So just looking at the time and to wrap up, first of all, thank you all for joining. I think this really sets a very solid foundation to continue the work that PACE and ILO are doing and creates new passageways to open discussion with new partners as well. Today's discussion, we really talked about the need for pilots and the need to upskill those in a structured way, using qualitative and quantitative metrics, and also looking at it from a financial angle where we're not necessarily thinking of the solution where we're making the most money from one side, but across the value chain, how we can gain different kinds of profit across the value chain. And I think that will be a very important part of the PACE and ILO project moving forward. So I highly recommend those present today to get more involved with this project and see how we can collaborate also to combat fragmentation between the different pilots that exist, but also to ensure that we're really working together towards a just transition to a circular economy. Thanks so much and have a great day and enjoy the rest of the World Circular Economy Forum.